Beneath a moon that wept silver tears upon the frozen earth, weaving sorrow into the very fabric of the night, Elara knelt alone in the shadowed grove, her trembling fingers tracing the etched stone that marked her son's grave, each line a silent elegy to the life that never fully bloomed. The wind howled through the ancient pines like a chorus of forsaken souls, their branches clawing at the starless sky as if pleading for mercy from the unrelenting cold. It had been 3 full moons since the pack's elders had cast her out, their voices cold as the frost that now nipped at her exposed skin, declaring her omega essence too fragile, too irreparably tainted by the tragedy of her child's stillbirth. Born under a blood-red eclipse that painted the heavens in ominous crimson, the boy, Lear, she had named him in her dreams, had entered the world without a cry, his tiny form a canvas for the goddess's cruel artistry. The elders whispered of curses, of omens that marked her as ill-fated, unfit for the warmth of the communal hearth or the protection of the Alpha who had sired him in a fleeting moment of passion. That Alpha, now a distant shadow in her memories, had turned away without a word, his pack trailing him like obedient specters fleeing the encroaching dawn, leaving Elara to the mercy of the wilds. She had wandered the fringes of Ironfang territory ever since, a spectral figure adrift in the snow-swept expanses, subsisting on bitter roots unearthed from frozen soil and the faint, flickering warmth of memories that refused to fade. The grave was her sole anchor in this sea of isolation, a humble slab of weathered granite, roughly hewn by her own hands under the cover of night, carved with the delicate imprint of a wolf's paw and the single cherished name, Lear. Rejection had hollowed her from within, carving out pieces of her spirit until she felt as insubstantial as the mist rising from the thawing patches of earth. She wept not for self-pity, but for the profound silence that enveloped her, louder and more accusatory than the fiercest weevo echoing through the valleys. The tears froze on her cheeks, crystalline reminders of her solitude, as the wind tugged insistently at her tattered cloak, the last remnant of the life she had known. This cloak, woven from the coarse wool of mountain sheep gathered in better days, now hung frayed and threadbare from the edges, mended haphazardly with whatever scraps she could find, thorns for needles, sinew from small game for thread. It was more than fabric. It was a shroud of her former self, torn in the chaotic frenzy of her banishment when the pack's enforcers had dragged her from the den, their grips bruising and unyielding. In those moments of rage and despair, the cloak had ripped along the seams, symbolizing the violent severance from her world. Now, it clung to her like a second skin of sorrow, offering scant protection against the biting chill that seeped into her marrow. Elara pressed her palm flat against the cold stone one final time, the granite unyielding beneath her touch, and whispered a fervent prayer to the lunar spirits that watched from above. Let the frost claim what the pack so callously discarded, and grant peace to what remains unspoken. But as she rose unsteadily to her feet, the encroaching storm gathering force on the horizon with dark clouds swallowing the faint light, a low, guttural growl pierced the gale, not the wild snarl of a prowling beast, but something deeper, more resonant, carrying the timbre of authority long fractured and a regal presence now reduced to desperation. The sound rooted her in place, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, as the shadows between the trees began to shift and coalesce into a form that promised both peril and an inexplicable pull. The Alpha materialized from the dense tree line like a specter forged in the raw fury of stormlight, his massive, fur-matted form staggering against the relentless wind, eyes burning with the feral gleam of one who had become both hunter and hunted in the span of endless nights. King Thorn of the Silverclaw realm, once an unassailable titan among alphas whose name evoked both awe and dread across the frozen domains, now shouldered the crushing weight of exile's merciless reflection. Guilt gnawed at him more viciously than the fangs of any rival he had ever faced. It stemmed from a decree issued in the heat of ambition years prior, one that had raised a neighboring pack to ashes, leaving behind a trail of orphaned pups shivering in the snow and a blood debt that replayed in his nightmares like an unending dirge. Cursed by the haunting vision of a seer who foretold an eternal winter as retribution for his unyielding pursuit of power, Thorn had abandoned his throne under the cover of a moonless night, fleeing into the uncharted borderlands where no crown's shadow could reach. His broad shoulders, etched with scars from battles won through sheer dominance, now slumped under the invisible yoke of remorse, each step through the drifts a labored testament to the man he had become, ethical to his core, yet melancholic, bound by a duty that demanded he atone alone. The encounter with Alara unfolded not as a mere twist of fate, but as an primal, instinctual tether that drew him inexorably toward her, her subtle omega scent slicing through the blizzard's chaos like a lifeline of unexpected warmth amid the void of isolation. It mingled with the sharp pine resin and the acrid hint of distant smoke from some forgotten campfire, creating a sensory tapestry that both repelled and intrigued him. Alara froze mid-motion as he drew nearer, his breath emerging in ragged clouds that dissipated into the frigid air, the metallic tang of fresh blood tainting the wind from wounds he had bound hastily with strips of his own cloak, gashes from thorns and falls during his flight. Fear coiled tightly in her chest, as sharp and unyielding as the icicles that daggered the overhanging branches, threatening to impale any who dared the storm's full wrath. Yet, beneath that instinctive terror, a flicker of curiosity ignited, a rare, defiant ember piercing the fog of her desolation, urging her to see beyond the immediate threat. "Stay back," she murmured, her voice emerging as a fragile thread barely audible against the roaring gale, laced with the tremor of one who had learned caution through betrayal. Thorn halted abruptly, not out of deference to her command, but from the jolt of profound recognition mirrored in her wide, storm-gray eyes that reflected his own fractured soul with an uncanny clarity. Their gazes locked beneath the moon's cold, indifferent vigil, a profound silence stretching between them, heavy with the weight of unspoken histories. In that suspended moment, denial took root like frost on fragile blooms. He, the fallen king, rationalized her presence as nothing more than potential prey or a fleeting distraction in his solitary penance. She, the outcast Omega, perceived only another looming shadow of hierarchical power, a force to evade at all costs lest it drag her deeper into the abyss. Yet the air thrummed with an undercurrent of unspoken possibility, the first subtle fracture in the armored walls of their mutual isolation, as if the goddess herself had woven their paths with threads of inevitable convergence. In the cavern's flickering torchlight, where elongated shadows danced like wary ancestral spirits across the irregular stone walls, Ilara knelt beside Thorn, binding his grievous wounds with meticulous care, using strips she tore from the hem of her cloak, the fabric now irrevocably stained with the warm crimson of his blood, mingling intimately with a fresh cut on her own hand from a jagged rock. The enemy that pursued them was no faceless phantom, but a vengeful rival alpha from Thorn's shadowed past, whose pack, scarred by the old massacre, hunted with the precision of wolves scenting long-denied justice, their distant howls reverberating through the narrow mountain passes like divine judgments echoing from the goddess's own throat. They had sought shelter in this forgotten cave, high in the unforgiving crags where the wind had sculpted the rock into towering sentinels of ice and stone, their forms looming as silent guardians against the blizzard's onslaught. Huddled together in the dim refuge, veins of frost tracing intricate patterns across the ceiling like celestial maps, they shared the meager fire Alara had coaxed to life from damp, resinous branches scavenged from the entrance, its flames sputtering defiantly, casting a golden glow that pushed back the encroaching darkness just enough to foster fragile hope. Empathy began to weave its intricate, subtle web between them as Thorn, his voice emerging in halting, gravelly tones laced with exhaustion, spoke of his own son's grave, desecrated by the very foes now baying at their heels, the sacred site profaned in a ritual of spite that twisted the knife of his guilt deeper. Alara's heart clenched in visceral response, her own profound loss resonating like a raw, unhealed echo within her chest. For the first time since her banishment, her touch lingered on his skin, not as an act born of fear or obligation, but from the quiet, burgeoning understanding that survival in this merciless world demanded not solitary endurance, but a tentative alliance forged in shared vulnerability. The cloak, now draped protectively over them both to ward off the seeping cold that clawed at the cave's mouth, became their unspoken emblem of unity. Its tears and stains a poignant testament to the exiles they both embodied, binding their fates in threads of reluctant solidarity. As the fire crackled softly, its warmth a counterpoint to the howling winds outside, and the moon's pale light filtered through a narrow crevice high above like a tentative benediction from the heavens, their bond deepened incrementally, not in the impulsive rush of unchecked passion, but in the gradual thaw of guarded confessions exchanged in whispers. Thorn's calloused hand brushed against hers in the dimness, igniting a spark of raw instinct that both instinctively denied, overshadowed by the heavy mantle of their respective scars, physical and otherwise. Yet curiosity blossomed into a tentative trust, fragile as the first melt of spring snow as they shared fragments of their pasts. Her whispers of Lear's imagined laughter, his murmurs of the throne's hollow victories. The night wore on, relentlessly, the rival pack's weavos fading into muffled, distant threats swallowed by the storm. And in that precarious sanctuary carved from ice and stone, the nascent threads of their connection held firm against the tempests, both external and within. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Under the cavern's vast, domed ceiling, where moonlight pooled like spilled mercury on the uneven floor, casting ethereal reflections that danced with the fire's embers, Ilara's long-dormant gift stirred to life, a vivid vision that unfurled in the depths of her mind's eye, unveiling hidden paths through the impenetrable veil of swirling snow and inexorable fate. The Pathfinder's mark, that rare and latent omega power enshrined in the ancient lore of their kind, whispered tales of seers who could navigate the threads of destiny itself, had slumbered quiescently within her since the moment of her birth, awaiting the catalyst of profound desperation to awaken. It surged forth now, triggered by the urgent press of Thorn's unspoken plea as they plotted their dawn escape from the cave's confining embrace, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and smoldering wood. A rival scout's ominous shadow suddenly fell across the narrow entrance, his silhouette a harbinger of imminent capture. But Ilara's eyes glazed over with an otherworldly light, her breath catching as the vision seized her. She perceived it all in crystalline detail, a concealed trail snaking through the treacherous avalanche-prone ridge beyond the cave, its contours illuminated by shimmering lunar threads visible only to her gifted sight, a lifeline woven from starlight and intuition. Gasping sharply, she clutched the frayed edge of her cloak with white-knuckled fingers, the fabric now further tattered by the night's relentless trials, pulsing against her skin with a symbolic warmth that belied the chill surrounding them. Thorn observed her in rapt silence, his melancholic gaze, deep-set eyes shadowed by years of command and regret, sharpening with a mixture of awe and guarded wariness as the pieces of realization coalesced within him. She was no mere survivor scraping existence from the margins, he understood in that profound instant, but the pivotal key to unraveling the curse that had ensnared his soul, the Omega, whose visions could illuminate the path back from the yawning chasm of his guilt, guiding him toward a redemption he had scarcely dared to imagine. The revelation suspended between them like delicate frost crystals, forming on their exhaled breaths. Her emergent gift, a double-edged blade that both fortified their alliance and compelled Thorn to dismantle the barriers of his denial. "You see what shadows hide from me," he murmured, his voice roughened by wonder and the lingering rasp of pain, reaching out tentatively to steady her as the vision receded. Ilara trembled from head to toe, the power's initial surge coursing through her veins like a visceral fire laced with the metallic taste of blood and the crisp clarity of starlit nights, leaving her drained yet invigorated. In that charged moment, beneath the moon's unblinking, watchful eye, filtering through the stone, destiny murmured its inexorable claim upon them, transmuting the spark of mere curiosity into the profound entanglement of souls destined to intersect. At the frozen temple's imposing threshold, where towering pillars of translucent ice rose like the jagged teeth of the goddess herself, gleaming with an inner luminescence under the stormy sky, Thorn confronted the spectral ghosts of his tumultuous past, the rival Alpha's pack encircling them in a tightening ring of snarling fury, their eyes alight with predatory hunger. The confrontation ignited with explosive ferocity as the wind whipped the falling snow into a blinding, disorienting vortex that blurred the boundaries between earth and sky, the air saturated with the pungent, coppery scent of blood already spilled in the initial skirmish. Ilara positioned herself resolutely at Thorn's side, her Pathfinder vision serving as their strategic compass amid the chaos, illuminating fleeting opportunities for evasion and counterattack. Yet the true crucible of the moment was profoundly moral, a harrowing trial that laid bare the consequences of Thorn's ancient decree, the one that had orphaned the rival's own kin, scattering them like leaves in a gale, and now summoned vengeance in the form of unyielding retribution demanding either his life or her hard-won freedom. The cloak billowed dramatically around them like a tattered banner of unbowed defiance, its tears from previous ordeals mended yet resilient, embodying the delicate unity they had painstakingly forged from the ashes of their individual exiles. Thorn's ethical essence waged a fierce internal war, his broad frame taut with tension, the primal roar of power within him clamoring for the catharsis of war and dominance, while the quieter voice of compassion urged the path of mercy, a choice that could redefine his legacy. "What is strength?" he growled into the howling winds, his words carrying the weight of philosophical introspection amid the fray, if not the deliberate choice of forgiveness over the unfeeling edge of the blade. Ilara's heart thundered in her ears, each beat a thunderous echo of her own deep-seated rejection, mirroring the king's gnawing guilt in ways that both bonded and burdened her. She offered no pleas for leniency or quarter, but the internal conflict tore at her spirit, the resistant pull of burgeoning love clashing violently with her ingrained instinct to flee into the anonymity of solitude once more. As blades clashed in a symphony of metallic shrieks and guttural cries pierced the night, the snow beneath their feet churned into a muddy slurry stained with rivulets of red, contrasting starkly against the pristine white expanse. Thorn, in a pivotal act of moral reckoning, spared the life of the rival's beta, a young warrior whose fierce eyes held the haunting echo of innocence lost too soon, a reflection of the orphans his past actions had created. Blood arced through the air in vivid sprays, painting the frozen landscape, but the pack's cohesion faltered under the weight of this unexpected mercy, sowing seeds of doubt and hesitation among their ranks. Ilara's visions pierced the tumult like shafts of moonlight, carving a narrow path through the melee for their survival. But the judgment's aftermath lingered as a fresh spiritual wound, one that bound them inexorably deeper, compelling the reluctant acceptance of love as a costly, transformative proof rather than an effortless balm. In the sacred heart of the lunar temple, where eternal braziers burned with unquenchable flames that cast intricate golden flickers across walls etched with the ancient runes of the goddess, symbols of cycles unbroken and wounds transfigured, Thorn and Ilara confronted the festering core of his curse, initiating a ritual that demanded profound sacrifice as the forge of true renewal. The rebirth cascaded upon them in visceral, unrelenting waves, each phase a sensory onslaught that tested the limits of their endurance. Thorn's deep-seated guilt materialized as coiling tendrils of inky shadow emanating from his battle-scarred flesh, writhing like living nightmares born from the depths of his remorse. Ilara's awakened gift, the Pathfinder's luminous essence, pierced through the darkness with resolute precision, her visions weaving threads of purifying light that unraveled the curse's insidious hold, illuminating hidden fractures in the ritual's arcane weave. At the altar's pulsing center lay the cloak, elevated now to the status of a revered relic, steeped in the mingled essence of their shared blood from wounds both old and new, its once-torn fabric subtly mended by ethereal threads of moonlight that Alara summoned through focused will, transforming it into a conduit of their intertwined destinies. Choice defined the rite's harrowing core. Thorn, in a gesture of ultimate renunciation, offered the lingering remnants of his crown's formidable power, surrendering the intoxicating allure of ambition that had once defined him, all in exchange for her unassailable safety amid the rite's perils. Ilara, grappling with the rational undercurrents of fear that resisted full entanglement, weighed the solitude of her freedom against the depth of union, ultimately choosing the latter as the catalyst. For mutual healing, pain lanced through their forms in searing torrents, the elements of fire and frost merging chaotically within their veins, the blistering heat of the braziers contrasting the temple's ambient chill, the air alive with the heady, intoxicating scent of smoldering sacred herbs, and the crisp purity of freshly fallen snow drifting through unseen vents. Outside the temple's sanctified walls, a chorus of harmonious weavos rose from the surrounding wilds, blending into a celestial symphony that celebrated their impending transformation, the moon above bearing witness with serene approval. As the curse finally shattered with the resounding crack of fracturing ice under immense pressure, echoing through the chamber like the breaking of chains, Thorn rose from the altar renewed, his once-haunted eyes now reflecting the quiet, unyielding strength he beheld in Alara's gaze. Love, long denied and rationalized as folly, bloomed not as a whimsical reward, but as a redemptive fire tempered in the crucible of mercy, a profound proof that their wounds could indeed be healed through choices that honored compassion over conquest. Yet even in this moment of triumph, subtle shadows of the rivals' unresolved grudge lingered on the periphery, faint whispers of trials yet to unfold, hinting that rebirth was but the dawn of a longer journey. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Descending from the temple's lofty heights into the mist-shrouded valleys of ancient forests, where gnarled oaks stood as eternal sentinels beneath a canopy of perpetual twilight pierced by shafts of muted, ethereal light filtering through the interlocking branches, Alara and Thorn navigated the delicate equilibrium of their newfound peace with cautious steps, their senses attuned to the subtle shifts in the air that hinted at dangers lurking just beyond the veil of fog. The path wound downward in a serpentine trail, slick with melting ice that trickled into rivulets beside their feet, each droplet a reminder of the fragile thaw they had achieved within themselves. The air hung heavy with the damp scent of moss-covered bark and decaying leaves, mingled with the faint metallic undercurrent of distant rain, creating an atmosphere that pressed upon them like an unspoken warning. Thorn moved with the deliberate grace of a king, reclaiming his poise, his broad frame casting long shadows that merged with Alara's slighter form, their proximity a silent affirmation of the bond forged in the temple's flames, yet one tested at every turn by the ghosts of doubt that whispered in the wind. The arduous journey southward unfolded as a grueling test of their nascent connection, introspections blooming in languid, meandering rhythms amid the rhythmic crunch of fresh snow yielding reluctantly under their boots and the low, ominous rumble of distant avalanches cascading down unseen slopes, their echoes reverberating through the earth like the goddess's muffled thunder. Thorn's inherent melancholy deepened with each laborious mile traversed, resurfacing fragmented memories of his shattered realm like relentless ghosts stirred from their uneasy slumber. Vivid flashes of the Silverclaw throne room, once alive with the clamor of council and the gleam of polished armor, now standing empty and desolate, its halls echoing with the accusatory silence of those he had failed through his ambition's blind pursuit. These recollections prompted a profound philosophical reckoning that wove seamlessly through their sparse conversations, carried on breaths visible in the chill, the eternal, unyielding tension of faith pitted against the yawning void of despair, where belief in redemption clashed with the seductive pull of surrender, the inexorable tug of destiny's finely woven chains, binding them to paths they could neither fully see nor fully escape, versus the exhilarating, perilous liberty of personal, Choice in a world governed by the raw, primal instincts of pack and survival. Ilara listened intently, her own thoughts mirroring his turmoil as she pondered the weight of her exile. How rejection had stripped her of illusions, leaving only the stark truth that strength lay not in isolation, but in the courage to entwine fates despite the risk of further shattering. Ilara's Pathfinder gift, once a steady and luminous beacon guiding them through peril, now flickered with an erratic intensity that mirrored the emotional tempests raging within their evolving union. Visions that came in fits and starts, obscured by swirling mists of doubt and the overwhelming surge of feelings she had long suppressed. Love's full acceptance manifested as a resisted anchor in her soul, rationalized in the logical corners of her mind as a pragmatic necessity for mutual survival in this unforgiving landscape, yet palpably felt in every lingering glance exchanged across the trail, every accidental brush of hands that sent electric sparks coursing through the pervasive chill, igniting a warmth that both terrified and compelled her. The cloak, wrapped securely around her shoulders like a mantle of quiet, unyielding endurance, whispered tactile reminders of the blood they had shed in unison during the temple rite, its frayed edges catching on low-hanging branches and thorny undergrowth as if marking their arduous path with indelible symbols of persistence and shared sacrifice. The fabric, still bearing faint darkened stains from their wounds, felt heavier now, infused with the essence of their trials, a constant companion that grounded her amid the disorientation of her gift's instability. As the hush of dusk settled over the forest like a velvet shroud, the fog thickening into an impenetrable, swirling barrier that muffled sounds and distorted shapes, the ambush descended upon them with the sudden ferocity of a predator long in wait. The rival Alpha's forces erupted from concealed positions among the dense underbrush and behind the massive trunks of ancient oaks, their forms materializing like wraiths from the mist, eyes glowing with feral determination, blades drawn and glinting menacingly in the fading, blood-orange light of the setting sun that pierced the canopy in fleeting rays. Action exploded into being with the unrestrained fury of an unleashed storm, a deafening cacophony of clashing steel ringing out like discordant bells, guttural snarls tearing from throats honed by vengeance, and the heavy thud of bodies colliding against the frozen, unyielding ground, sending tremors through the earth. The metallic tang of freshly drawn blood permeated the air, mingling with the rich, earthy musk of disturbed soil and crushed foliage, creating a sensory assault that heightened every instinct to survival's edge. Ilara's visions, though faltering, guided Thorn's defensive maneuvers with a surgical precision born not from cold, calculated strategy, but from the profound empathy that now pulsed between them like a shared, synchronized heartbeat, allowing him to anticipate the subtle feints of lunging attackers, to parry lethal blows with the fluid economy of a warrior tempered by remorse, his movements a blend of raw power and newfound restraint. Amid the swirling melee of fur and fang, where shadows twisted into threats and the snow churned into a muddy slurry beneath the fray, a traitor emerged from the chaos with chilling clarity. A beta from Thorn's own disbanded pack, his once loyal face now contorted in a mask of betrayal's bitter resentment, his eyes burning with the poison of grudges nursed in secrecy. His defection struck like a moral dagger plunged deep into the king's heart, reopening wounds thought sealed by the temple's sacred fires, the betrayal a visceral reminder that trust, once fractured, could bleed anew. Ilara found herself thrust into a precipitous moral crossroads amid the pandemonium, to extend the full force of her gift toward healing the traitor's fractured mind, peering into the tangled roots of his disloyalty in a bid for redemption, or to withhold it and condemn him to the swift justice of the pack's unsparing claws. Her innate compassion, shining as a defiant, flickering beacon against the encroaching specter of all-out war that threatened to consume them both. As combatants fell one by one into the crimson-stained snow, their forms steaming faintly in the encroaching cold with the last wisps of life escaping as breath, the ethical dilemma crystallized into sharp, unrelenting relief. Could true redemption, that elusive grace they had only just begun to embrace, extend its merciful hand even to those who had willfully chosen to sow only the bitter seeds of ruin, division, and endless vendetta. Deep within the labyrinthine halls of the ice castle, a colossal fortress hewn directly from the mountain's frozen heart, its corridors twisting like the veins of some ancient, slumbering beast, where torchlight danced and painted vivid, ever-shifting murals of long-forgotten battles on walls laced with delicate, crystalline frost filigree that caught the flames in prismatic sparkles. The climactic confrontation blazed to life with incandescent fury, arraying Thorn's reclaimed honor and tempered resolve against the rival Alpha's insatiable, all-consuming thirst for retribution in a clash destined to echo through the shadowed annals of their kind for generations. The atmosphere thrummed with a palpable, almost tangible tension that vibrated through the stone floors and up into their bones, the air heavy and oppressively thick with the primal musk of agitated fur matted by sweat and snow, the sharp, acrid tang of oiled steel freshly drawn from leather sheaths with a whisper of menace, and the underlying bone-deep chill that seeped relentlessly from every unyielding stone surface like the very breath of winter incarnate, frosting the edges of their vision. Packs from both sides converged inexorably upon the castle's core, drawn by the pull of ancient rivalries and the scent of blood in the wind, under a moon swollen to grotesque, ominous proportions, its bloated, cratered face hanging unnaturally low in the ink-black sky as if compelled to bear witness to the unfolding tragedy with a sense of foreboding anticipation that mirrored the knot of dread in Alara's stomach. Echoes of howls reverberated through the halls, building to a crescendo that shook loose cascades of ice from the vaulted ceilings, each distant cry a thread in the tapestry of impending doom. Ilara's role in this maelstrom transcended the bounds of mere observation or support. Her Omega essence, amplified exponentially by the harrowing trials they had endured together, now served as a potent conduit for the goddess's inscrutable, otherworldly will, channeling visions and energies through the cloak that enveloped her like a second skin. Once a humble garment of survival, it had been transformed in the temple's rite, now adorned with intricate lunar embroidery wrought from threads of pure moonlight, its patterns glowing faintly with a residual ethereal magic that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, warming her against the castle's glacial embrace. Thorn, no longer shackled by the suffocating chains of unatoned guilt, but elevated and refined by the hard-won wisdom it had imparted upon him, stepped forward to face his rival in the grand central chamber, a vast, echoing space dominated by a floor of mesmerizing mosaic, depicting frozen rivers in eternal flow, their icy surfaces cracking ominously under the combined weight of the encircling warriors. Each fracture line a stark metaphor for the fracturing alliances and loyalties that surrounded them like a noose tightening. Introspection, so dominant in the quieter interludes of their journey, yielded seamlessly and completely to the raw, visceral impact of the battle that erupted without preamble. The air filled with the wet smack of fists against flesh, the shrill ring of blade-on-blade forging sparks that illuminated snarling faces in fleeting bursts, blood spraying in graceful, arcing trajectories that splattered against the unyielding cold stone walls and pooled in viscous crimson pools on the floor. Each drop, a testament to the cost of unresolved sins. Huevos rent the vaulted ceilings like the rolling peals of thunder trapped within the mountain, reverberating off the ice until the sound seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere, while every blow landed carried the profound gravity of judgment upon transgressions, both ancient and immediate. The sensory overload weaving a relentless tapestry of searing pain, exhaustive exertion, and the primal surge of raw, unfiltered emotion that coursed through veins like liquid fire. Alara's moral crossroads reached its zenith amid this unrelenting pandemonium, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting imperatives, to intervene decisively with the full spectrum of her gift, projecting overwhelming visions of peace and revelation upon the combatants at the dire risk of expending her very essence and forfeiting the cherished freedom she had only recently reclaimed, or to stand resolute on the sidelines amid the debris and the fallen, embracing the unpalatable liberty of allowing war's brutal, inexorable course to unfold unchecked, claiming lives on both sides in its indifferent maw. Philosophical undercurrents wove through the chaos like invisible, guiding currents beneath the surface tumult. In fleeting moments of clarity amid the fray, Alara pondered the bitter truth that the throne of raw power, no matter how exalted, amounted to little more than despair's gilded cage without the tempering, redemptive grace of compassion. A principle that echoed resoundingly in the clash of fangs against armored hide, the desperate grapples for dominance that left trails of fur and blood in their wake. As the rival Alpha lunged with lethal, unbridled intent, his form a blur of muscle and malice, Thorn countered with measured, purposeful force, honed by his ethical evolution, parrying and striking with precision that spared unnecessary cruelty. Yet, it was Alara's timely, courageous intervention, a vision projected directly into the aggressor's turbulent mind like a shaft of piercing moonlight, that induced the shattering epiphany he could no longer deny. The overwhelming tide of his own buried losses crashing upon him in vivid, unrelenting waves, visions of orphaned kin shivering in forgotten graves and shattered dreams crumbling like frost under the sun, forcing him to confront the mirror of his vengeance as nothing more than a reflection of Thorn's past sins. The rival Alpha crumpled to his knees in the mosaic's heart, not to the finality of death's cold embrace, but to the humbling, soul-rending weight of this unforeseen revelation, his body racked with sobs that mingled with the settling dust and the drip of melting ice from above. His pack's unity fractured irreparably under the strain of this displayed mercy, warriors hesitating with blades half raised, doubt rippling through their ranks like cracks in glacial ice. In the profound, settling hush that followed the battle's ebb, broken only by the labored, ragged breaths of survivors and the steady, melancholic drip of water echoing in the chambers, Thorn's hand sought and found Alara's amid the scattered debris of broken weapons and fallen forms, their fingers intertwining in a gesture of quiet solidarity. Love's proof, solidified in the unrelenting crucible of sacrifice and choice, bound them closer than any oath, though the lingering cost gleamed starkly in the haunted wide eyes of the wounded survivors scattered around them. A poignant reminder that even victory in the flames of confrontation often bore the indelible scars of its merciless price, etching lessons into flesh and spirit alike. Atop the snow-capped pinnacle, where the vast, untamed world unfurled below into endless horizons of pristine, unbroken white expanses, cradled by jagged peaks that pierced the heavens like the defiant spears of ancient gods, under a sky ablaze with the iridescent flowing veils of the aurora borealis, dancing in hypnotic, sinuous waves of emerald and violet that painted the night in otherworldly splendor. Alara and Thorn sealed their profound, hard-earned rebirth in a union that transcended the frail, ephemeral constructs of crowns forged in ambition, curses woven in retribution, and the rigid hierarchies that had once defined and divided their worlds. The wind, softened now from its earlier tempests, to a melodic, whispering lullaby of renewal and promise, carried on its gentle currents the faint, improbable scent of night flowers blooming defiantly against the relentless frost, a miraculous, tender defiance of nature's harsh, unyielding decree, their delicate petals unfurling in hidden crevices as if summoned directly from the potency of their intertwined choices and the subtle, approving favor of the goddess who watched from the moon's serene visage. The cloak, restored to a state of symbolic wholeness through the alchemical trials of their shared journey, from tattered remnant to sacred relic, draped gracefully over their shoulders like a shared mantle of destiny, its fabric infused with the lingering warmth of blood, fire, and moonlight, as they knelt in deep reverence before a simple, unadorned altar fashioned from weathered granite stone and captured fragments of starlight that seemed to pulse with an inner, ethereal life. Runes etched into the altar's surface, ancient symbols of cycles unbroken, wounds transfigured into strength, and bonds eternal, glowed faintly in harmony with the synchronized rhythm of their heartbeats, a quiet symphony underscoring the solemnity of the moment. Ilara's Pathfinder gift, once a flickering ember constrained by fear and isolation, now flowed freely and unbound at last, unhindered by the shadows of doubt or the resistances of a heart long guarded, illuminating an expansive array of shared destinies that stretched into the infinite unknown, visions of leadership tempered by collective wisdom, of healing ripples that would extend outward to mend the fractured packs below, and paths where compassion became the true crown of their reign. Thorn's ethical melancholy, that pervasive shroud which had once dimmed the fire in his spirit and weighed upon his every step, softened irrevocably into a quiet, steadfast resolve born of introspection and trial. His deepest, most festering wounds cauterized not merely by the passage of time or ritual alone, but by the gentle, insistent healing touch of Ilara's unwavering presence, her empathy a balm that soothed the raw edges of guilt into something purposeful and whole. She, risen like a phoenix from the scorching ashes of rejection's cruel, unrelenting forge, where banishment had stripped her bare and left her adrift in desolation, embraced the fullness of love not as an immediate, intoxicating bliss that blinded the senses, but as the deliberate, transformative tempering of souls in the slow-burning fires of mutual proof and redemptive choice. Mercy exalted triumphantly over the brute force of might, faith emerging victorious and radiant from the gaping jaws of despair. Destiny harmonized with the sacred freedom of willful alliance. In that transcendent, all-encompassing hush, profound in its depth and intimacy, enveloping them like the aurora's embrace and broken only by the synchronized cadence of their breaths mingling with the soft, resonant hum of the celestial display overhead. They exchanged vows beneath the moon's benevolent, eternal gaze, their words woven with the poetry of the wilds, promises to wander the vast wilds no longer as solitary exiles haunted by loss, but to lead with the illuminating, unquenchable light of compassion as their guiding star, forging a new, inclusive legacy from the scattered remnants of the old, where packs once divided by blood feuds would find unity in shared healing. The rival packs, humbled and irrevocably transformed by the night's cascade of revelations and the undeniable power of the visions that had pierced their vengeful hearts, dispersed into the shadowed wilds with a reluctant, newfound grace. Warriors slinging weapons over shoulders and casting lingering glances back at the pinnacle, their parting uivos evolving from primal threats into mournful, harmonious echoes that spoke of a fragile, hard-won peace settling over the land like the first gentle snow of winter's end. Renascimento thus complete in its multifaceted glory, a rebirth not of flesh alone, but of spirit, bond, and world. Their story inscribed indelibly into the eternal lunar chronicles, pages turned by the winds of fate themselves, a luminous, enduring testament that every alpha's concealed wound, no matter how deep or festering, inevitably encounters its destined omega healer in the vast tapestry of existence, and that rejection, far from heralding a final, irrevocable end, births instead an eternal beginning woven from the resilient threads of destiny, courageous choice, and the unbreakable alchemy of redemption that turns sorrow into sovereignty. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.